People are no strangers to stories of brutal assaults, brutal stabbings, brutal attacks, murders, rapes committed by people who have entered the UK and Ireland illegally, been here for a long time, haven't been deported. And many people say, well, if it was to happen to a politician, this would all stop straight away. Well, that's not the case. And this story today, I believe, deserves some attention. It's to do with the murder, the brutal and savage murder of a Tory MP, David Amess, who was a Sir nonetheless. He had had his knighthood conferred upon him, and calls for a public inquiry into his death have been squashed today by the British Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. So let's get into the details of this, because let's be honest about it. This type of story is not a story that the government wants to hold their hands up to and admit, well, this could have been prevented or this was our fault. So this is going back to the middle of February here. Sir David Amess killer left Prevent too quickly. And this is a picture of the man who was murdered. And David Amess died after he was stabbed more than 20 times. His killer was exited from the government's Prevent anti-terror program too quickly. And its handling of him was, quote, suboptimal, a review has said. So this was a man who had been allowed entry into the UK from Somalia, and he was in an anti-terror program. He was exited from it too early, and he went on to savagely murder this gentleman, David Amess. You know, the question immediately should be asked, well, why wasn't he deported instead of put onto a government program? Ali Harbi Ali murdered the Conservative MP for South End West at a constituency surgery in October 2021. He first became known to the Prevent programme in October 2014. So he had been in the UK for 7 years before he carried out this murder. He was in a Prevent anti-terrorism programme from October 14, but his case was closed in 2016. He was deemed to be no real threat, obviously. The Prevent Learning Review into the case was published earlier and said the hope of addressing Ali's vulnerabilities was missed because of a breakdown in communication. We'll try telling that to the dead man's family. The review was commissioned by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Police. Sir David's wife and daughter both welcomed the report's publication and urged the government to open a public inquiry into his death. Now, that was in the middle of February. So news has came out today that they're not getting the public inquiry. They believe, the government believes, and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, said, no, there's nothing else can be learnt from this. We've learned our lesson. Notes have been taken. It was suboptimal. So just let's all move on with our lives. In a statement to the House of Commons, Security Minister Dan Jarvis said the report found the rationale for certain decisions in the monitoring of Ali was not explicit. The assessment in terms of his perpetrators' vulnerabilities was problematic. Vulnerabilities? If he's come from Somalia, he's in the UK and he's contributing absolutely nothing to society, get him the hell out. This is just mirroring what's going on in Ireland. This is worth taking note of, because this blight is the same irrespective of your geographical location. His vulnerability assessment was problematic. This led to questionable decision-making and suboptimal handling. If there's any questions at all, any questions, any doubt, out they go. Deport immediately. Immediately. Instead of letting him stay in the country for another 7 years at taxpayers' expense and then going on to viciously murder this man. Responsibilities between police and local authorities were blurred. Yeah, I'm sure they were. So today, the story is that the government, the British government, have rejected a call for the inquiry into MP's murder. The Home Secretary's rejected call, so this is coming right from the top. In a letter addressed to Lady Julie Amess, that's this man's wife, and Katie Amess, his daughter, Yvette Cooper said, it's hard to see how an inquiry would be able to go beyond killer Ali Harbi Ali's trial and recent Prevent Learning Review. Imagine that was your dad had been murdered, or your husband had been murdered, or your son had been murdered, and the Home Secretary or your Defence Minister had said, you know what, there's no point in looking into this. We've had a learning review. We made some mistakes. We were suboptimal. So we're just gonna move on. Let's just move on with our lives. In a letter addressed to this man's wife, we've touched on that. Katie Amess, the daughter of Sir David, said Cooper's words were like adding salt to an open wound, branding them unacceptable and insulting. That seems to be par for the course. You know, when people have been brutally attacked, murdered, they've lost a family member, they've been viciously assaulted, nothing's done about it. Nothing's done. Lip service is paid, or nothing's done about it. It's like adding salt into the wounds. He was stabbed to death. Her father was stabbed to death by Ali, a fanatic of so-called Islamic State, at a constituency surgery on October 2021. His widow said Keir Starmer should go away and reconsider the government's position ahead of the family's meeting with the Prime Minister and Home Secretary on Wednesday. What an absolute myth. Imagine Starmer and Cooper having the gall to look at this man's widow and daughter in the eye and say, there's nothing more that we do. It's suboptimal. You're not getting a public inquiry. To be honest, if they had tight border controls and they actually knew how to police their own borders, this would never have happened. This would never have happened. The savage would never have been allowed into the country, let alone being allowed to stay for 7 years, identified as a potential terrorist, put into a government program and then exited in 2016. Then he went on to kill in 2021. Describing her reaction to the letter, Katie Amess said she felt sadness, betrayal, pain, and just heartbreak, really. That's my point here for anyone that's listening. If you think that if someone in government, or in this case, a sir in the English government, an MP, is going to be used as a springboard to tighten down and clamp down harder, no, it's not going to happen. There's a plan in place here. There's a big club, as they say, and you're not in it, as George Carlin would have said, actually. Amos's family called on the PM to consider including his murder in the public inquiry into the Southport killings. And if you're not familiar with them, that was conducted by a Rwandan migrant who came and lived in Wales. And then the British government, buried and covered up large elements of that, which led to public uproar and massive rioting. Again, could have been prevented. Could have been prevented. Ali had been referred to Prevent 7 years before he stabbed David 20 times at a Belfriars Methodist church on Leigh-on-Sea. No respect for the man's position, no respect for the man's location. Butchered him at a church. He was sentenced to a whole of life order in the Old Bailey. That means he's being paid for and kept by the British taxpayer. How many times have we covered these stories where the Irish taxpayers paying legal fees and accommodation fees in various Irish prisons for people of this ilk? Sir David's family received a letter rejecting their call for a public inquiry into the case last Thursday, the details of which were made available today. So in her letter, Cooper said a coroner had looked carefully at whether to resume an inquest following the criminal trial. It's not about the actual method of death. It's about, in my opinion, whether or not this could have been prevented or not, which I believe it could. But hey, who am I and what do I know? Circumstances, it's hard to see how an inquiry could go beyond what has been reviewed in the trial. Prevent learning review, coroner's report. On that basis, the government can't establish a public inquiry. They can't, or they won't. They won't establish a public inquiry. They won't. They can't have this laid bare. These feelings, the fact that this man's life should not have been taken from him in such a vicious way. Cooper went on to say, this is not the answer you're looking for. Obviously not, but she was happy to provide it anyway. Despite repeated calls, we've been denied the one thing that can provide real answers: a full public inquiry. Yeah, and even if there was a public inquiry, this would drag on for years and years and years. And in the same time, this man would still be kept at His Majesty's pleasure on a whole of life order. The amount of money that would be spent on legal fees for this as well, lawyers getting rich off of the back of this, and to show what at the end, most likely that this savage should never have been allowed entry into Britain to begin with, let alone allowed to remain there for years before he committed this murder. Talking about their father being used as a political figure in a game of chess, Downing Street said there have been improvements to prevent in the years since David's killer was referred. Don't worry about improving prevent, improve your border controls. In the years since this cowardly attack, we have launched a series of investigations asking whether or not this could be prevented. Let me save you hundreds of millions of pounds. Yes is the answer. Significant improvements have been made to prevent, as well as stronger protections introduced for MPs. Listen, the bottom line is, if these maniacs, if these savages want you dead, they'll get you one way or the other. And if they can't get you, they'll get to someone else that's similar to you or of the same persuasion. So that's a summary today of what's happening in Britain in and around this murder and inquest, or calls for a public inquiry to the death of David Amess. And you can see parallels of this type happening all across Ireland, all across the UK, all across Europe, all across the world at this time, when you open your doors and you allow savages to flood into your country and remain in your country when they're known to the government, and not deported at the first available opportunity. If you like the content, subscribe to this channel, share this content, leave a comment, tell me what you think down below. If you're really moved, you can join the channel, support independent media. I'm Rick Munn, no risk, no reward, over and out.